I was 47 when my life quietly began to collapse. I had spent over 2 decades at the same university, teaching English literature to students who usually looked uninterested, yet listened just enough to pass their exams. I believed I understood life, love, and human weakness. I had read all the great books, convinced that knowledge was the same as wisdom. I didn't yet know that understanding weakness on the page is very different from facing it within yourself. Back then, I still believed desire carried truth, that it added beauty and meaning to life. It began with one of my students. Her name no longer matters. She was around 20 or 21, reserved, with a natural beauty that didn't ask for attention. One afternoon, she came to my office to ask about a poem. I remember her standing near the window as I explained it. Sunlight filled the room, and suddenly it felt uncomfortably small. I should have noticed what was stirring inside me. Instead, I convinced myself it was harmless admiration. I told myself I was far too old to want her. Time passed, and I found myself waiting for her visits. She laughed at my jokes during lectures. When she smiled, something long asleep inside me stirred awake. It made me feel young again, and that feeling was dangerous. I was divorced, living alone in a modest apartment close to campus. My days had become quiet, almost unseen. I thought her presence had brought warmth back into my life. I didn't realize how deeply mistaken I was. One evening after a lecture, I offered to drive her home. It was raining, and she agreed. When we arrived, I asked if she wanted to come in for coffee. I'm still not sure what I expected. Maybe nothing. But she followed me upstairs, and in that moment every reason to stop disappeared. I remember the silence, the damp smell of rain-soaked clothes, my heart beating far too fast. That night changed everything. Afterward, I tried to explain it to myself. I called it love. I believed I could guide her, protect her, bring her into my world. I failed to see that I had crossed a line I could never step back from. She stopped attending classes. My emails went unanswered. Then one day, I was called into a meeting with the department. Papers lay on the table, filled with words like complaint, harassment, and misconduct. I sat there numb as people I had known for years spoke to me like I was a stranger. The news spread quickly. Students whispered. Colleagues avoided my eyes. I denied wrongdoing, insisting it was a private matter between adults. But the truth weighed more than my pride. Before the term ended, my position was gone. I was given a choice: resign quietly or face a public hearing. I resigned. Leaving campus for the last time, I felt both anger and relief. I told myself they were hypocrites, unfit to judge me. Yet inside, there was an emptiness I had never felt before. My phone grew silent. Friends became distant and formal. I thought of the girl not with affection, but with shame. I tried writing again, hoping to teach small community classes, but the words felt hollow and untrue. My daughter Lucy lived 2 hours away on a small farm. She had left the city long ago, tired of its noise and rules. She grew vegetables, sold them at the market, and lived simply with her dogs. We weren't close, but when she heard what happened, she called and offered me a place to stay. I packed my belongings and went, telling myself it was temporary, that I would rebuild soon. I didn't yet understand that my old life was already over. The road to Lucy's farm was long and still. I remember the scent of dry grass and the hum of insects in the hot air. When I arrived, Lucy stepped out with her hair tied back, hands streaked with dirt. She looked steady and calm, everything I wasn't. Her life was simple. She grew her own food, cared for her animals, and minded her own affairs. I envied her calm. At first, I tried to help. I woke early, carried water, fed the dogs, but I was clumsy. My hands knew books, not soil. Still, she never complained. Evenings, we sat outside, watching the light fade over the fields. She spoke about the farm, the nearby village, her small world. I listened and felt a rare sense of safety. Even there, my disgrace shadowed me. Newspapers had covered my story, and sometimes strangers recognized my name. Lucy said it didn't matter, that people forgot quickly, but I saw their eyes in town. I became careful, afraid of attention. I stayed mostly on the farm, reading old books, fixing fences. I told myself I was helping, rebuilding. In truth, I was hiding. Then came the day that shattered the rest of me. It was Sunday, Lucy at the market. I was fixing a gate when 3 young men walked down the dirt road. I waved. They smiled. Later, Lucy said they had visited before, from a nearby village, and were friendly. I wanted to believe her. A week later, they returned. Lucy was home alone. I was in the field when I heard her screams. By the time I reached her, it was too late. They had taken what they wanted, left her on the floor, the house burning. I pulled her out. She didn't cry or speak, only looked at me as if I had no right to stand there. In the following days, she refused the police. I begged her, but she said no. She wanted to stay, rebuild, move on. I couldn't understand her silence. Later, I realized she was protecting herself, refusing to be seen as a victim. I saw my own shame in her eyes. She carried a pain no one could fix, and I was powerless. Everything in my life had been stripped away: work, reputation, dignity, even my daughter's trust. I had thought desire was life, freedom. Now, it felt like a curse. The same hunger that ruined my career brought us to this empty farm where the night's silence felt heavier than guilt. Lying awake, I thought of the girl from the university, of Lucy moving quietly through her days, and of myself, once in control, now a shadow among ruins. That was my true punishment. Losing my job had been easier than living with who I became. The woman laughed softly, remarking I must have been beautiful once. I went back to my room for the rest of the day. In the evenings, I tried writing again, not of love, but of shame and survival. Words came slowly, painfully. I wrote of the girl from the university, without using her name. I tried to understand myself through those sentences. I realized I had always believed I controlled my story. Now I saw life writes its own story, and we only follow. Lucy never read my words. I did not show her. She was living her own story now, far braver and harder than mine. I admired her, even as I feared for her. I wanted to protect her, but she no longer needed me. One evening, she told me that one of the men from the attack had come back to speak with her. My chest tightened at the news. She said he wanted to work on the farm, to help rebuild. I told her it was madness. She said she could not live in fear forever. I begged her not to trust him. She said she was not trusting him, only surviving. I could not grasp her calm. I wanted revenge, justice, anything to make sense of the world again. But she had moved beyond that. She said to live here, we had to follow the rules of the land, not our own. I felt sick hearing her words, yet I saw her strength. I wondered if this was what forgiveness looked like: quiet endurance, not peace. One afternoon, I went into town for supplies. The day was hot, and I stopped at a small cafe for water. A man at a nearby table recognized me. He stared for a long moment, then said my name softly, testing it. I pretended not to hear, paid, and left. The shame stayed with me all the way home. My disgrace had not faded, it had only changed form. I was no longer a teacher who lost her job. I was a woman carrying a past that would not heal. At the farm, Lucy worked in the garden, her belly showing beneath a loose shirt. She looked peaceful, her hands streaked with soil. Life continued, even when broken. She noticed me watching and smiled slightly. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. That night, I sat outside as the sky darkened. I listened to the wind and insects, the dogs lying nearby half asleep. I thought of desire and how it had led me here. It began as a small flame, something that made me feel alive, but I had followed it blindly, causing pain and losing myself. Now I was learning that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Still, the quiet of the farm gave me a strange peace. The work, the soil, the rhythm of each day, even the silence between Lucy and me, it was not happiness, but it was real. I began to see that living with shame did not mean being destroyed by it. It meant moving forward, day by day. Sometimes I imagined what people in the city thought of me now. Perhaps they forgot me. Perhaps my story still served as a warning. It did not matter. I no longer needed their approval. I was no longer part of that world. My life was smaller, harder, yet cleaner. Watching the sunrise over the hills, I felt this might be the life I was meant to have. Not teaching, but learning to survive. At night, when sleep eluded me, I thought of forgiveness. I did not know if I believed in it anymore. I had not forgiven myself, and Lucy had not forgiven me. But perhaps forgiveness was slow, like new grass growing after fire, you do not see it at first, then suddenly, it is there. I began to hope that Lucy's child might grow up on this land, among the dogs and trees, never knowing what had happened. Perhaps that too was forgiveness. And in that thought, for the first time, I felt a small, fragile peace. By the time the baby arrived, the seasons had shifted. The summer heat had softened, and the wind carried the scent of fresh rain. Lucy gave birth at the small clinic in town. I sat beside her the entire time, though she never asked me to. She was quiet and strong, her face calm even in pain. When the baby cried for the first time, something inside me broke open. I had believed joy would never return, but it did, quiet, fragile, mixed with fear and sadness, yet real. The child was small and beautiful. Lucy named him Samuel. She did not explain why. I did not ask. She looked at him with a weary love I could not fully understand. I wondered if she remembered the men who hurt her when she looked at him, but she only said he was hers, and that was enough. We brought Samuel home in a soft blanket. The dogs followed us, curious and alert. Lucy moved slowly in the first days. I cooked, cleaned, and for the first time, she let me help without protest. In the evenings, I held the baby while she rested. His breathing was soft and steady, like the sound of forgiveness. I began to believe life could offer small chances to begin again, even when undeserved. The farm changed. The house felt alive. Villagers visited, bringing small gifts for Samuel. They smiled more at Lucy and spoke kindly to me. Perhaps enough time had passed. Perhaps new life softened memory. I stayed on the farm longer than planned. I told myself it was for Lucy, but the truth was simpler, I had nowhere else. The university never called, and no other schools would hire me. My name remained a warning. At first, I felt trapped, but over time I accepted it. The city no longer felt like home. This quiet place, with its rough soil and early mornings, was where I belonged. Each week I went into town for supplies. Shopkeepers knew me by name and treated me kindly. Conversations no longer touched the past. They spoke of weather, prices, animals, crops, small details that made life safe. I began helping an old man in the nearby valley. His name was Peter. He could barely walk and had heard of me from Lucy. He needed help feeding his dogs and goats. I went every few days. His farm was small and quiet. The animals trusted me quickly. I cleaned pens, fixed fences, and sometimes sat in the afternoon sun with them. The work made me feel useful again. Peter often spoke of the past, of a world that had changed too quickly. He said people no longer knew how to live close to the land. I listened silently, knowing he spoke also of balance lost when people try to control everything. I understood that better than anyone. In the evenings, Lucy was usually in the garden with Samuel. She smiled when she saw me, a small smile of peace rather than love, and that was enough. We no longer spoke of the past. It sat between us like a closed wound that ached in bad weather. We had learned to live around it. Months passed into a year. Samuel began to walk, following the dogs everywhere, laughing when they barked. He liked to sit on my lap as I told him stories, not from books, but about the earth, the rain, the wind, and the small things that grow after fire. He listened with wide, serious eyes, as if he could feel the history around him without understanding it. Lucy grew softer over time. She still worked hard, but there was a lightness I had not seen before. I think Samuel gave her that. Watching her with him, I saw something like forgiveness, not the kind from words or religion, but the quiet kind that grows from survival. One afternoon, while I was fixing a fence, a car stopped at the gate. A man stepped out, dressed in a suit far too formal for the countryside. He introduced himself as a journalist from Cape Town, saying he wanted to speak about the university. My stomach tightened. I thought that chapter was closed. I told him there was nothing to say. He smiled politely and said people were curious how I had rebuilt my life. I told him they should not be. I asked him to leave. He looked disappointed but left respectfully. As he drove away, I felt an unfamiliar relief. For the first time, I did not feel fear. I felt control. My story no longer belonged to them, it belonged to me. That night, I sat outside and thought about how far I had come. I was not proud, but I was no longer broken. I had stopped explaining myself to the world. Forgiveness, I realized, does not always come from others. Sometimes it comes from living honestly. After the fall, I thought of desire again, the thing that had started everything. I once believed desire meant freedom. Then I learned it could trap you. Now I saw it as neither good nor bad, only human. What matters is how we act and what we do after our choices. Lucy came quietly and stood beside me. Samuel slept inside. She said she was thinking of expanding the farm, planting more vegetables for the market. I said it was a good idea. She asked if I wanted to stay another year. I said yes without hesitation. There was nothing left for me elsewhere. She nodded and went inside. That small exchange meant more than any apology or promise, it meant belonging. When the night grew colder, I watched the stars. I thought of my students long ago, wondering what they remembered of me. I hoped at least one had learned something from my mistakes, even if I never meant to teach it. In the morning light, I sometimes imagined my old self walking the hills, the woman who believed she understood everything. I did not hate her. I felt sorry. She had chased what she thought was love and lost her way, but she was still part of me, and I could not live without her. I began helping Lucy with her market trips again. I enjoyed arranging vegetables and watching people talk. Some recognized me but said nothing. Others smiled kindly. Nobody asked about my past. In those moments, I felt a strange healing. Returning to the farm, I sat under the old tree near the gate. Samuel often ran to me with a flower, placing it in my hair and laughing. Each time, I thought of how life continues despite everything. Pain does not vanish, but it becomes part of the story. One evening, as the sun set, I realized I was no longer waiting for forgiveness, I was living it, in work, silence, and small acts of care. Disgrace was never the end. It was the start of understanding how to live without pretense. That was desire's true cost, not lost work or respect, but the slow learning of humility, knowing love and shame often walk together. That night, I listened to Samuel breathing, Lucy moving softly, the dogs resting. The world was quiet, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Forgiveness was not to ask for, it was to live. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.